All right. Hello, everyone. If y'all could take your seat, we're going to get started. So we've already made it to the last session of this year's Student Voting Summits. My name is Autumn Mueller. I am a student at Grand Valley State University, and I vote because it is my civic responsibility. This last session is focused on how students can engage and impact the policy process beyond voting in elections. While voting is critical, real change often takes more than just being at the ballot box. We will hear from three speakers on a range of policy ideas. First, from Dr. Marty Jordan, professor of political science at Michigan State, on how policy can be shaped through research and academia. Then we will hear from Katie Ellison, a member of the Collegiate Student Advisory Task Force. And lastly, we'll hear from Satharia Menon about nonprofit advocacy and the role students can play. Let's welcome Dr. Martin Jordan.
Am I first?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here on Friday afternoon. I know you've already had a long day, and I recognize that this panel stands between you and your weekend. So I think I want to keep my remarks brief. There's just a few things I wanted to highlight. I know that you've been talking all day about voting, and I know that this panel is about beyond voting, but I still want to spend a minute on voting and how important it is. So voting matters, right? There's this old maxim, maybe you talked about it today, that 70% of 70-year-olds show up, while only 20% of 20-year-olds show up, right? But young people have been changing that reality in the last couple of elections. For example, more than half of young people between the ages of 18 and 29 turned out to vote in the 2020 election, right? More than half. It was amazing, right? It was one of the largest turnouts for that generation in many, many decades. So you turning out matters, right? And it's not because you turning out only changes election outcomes, it does, but your participation is a signal to policymakers about your preferences. It's probably no secret to any of you that you have different policy preferences than your parents and your grandparents, right? I mean, the young people that I meet tend to have strong concerns about climate change and global warming. The young people I meet care about racial equity, right? The young people I meet care about affordable college. The young people I talk to care about decriminalizing drug use, right? Many of you hold different preferences from your parents and grandparents. Their voices are heard because they show up, right? Young people's voices generally aren't heard because not enough young people participate. Now, I know I'm speaking to the choir here or singing to the choir, but it's incumbent upon all of us then who are engaged to make sure that we get the rest of the people in our lives also engaged. And elected officials really only pay attention to those who participate, honestly. And so evidence of this is a recent study came out and it showed that a 1% increase in young people turning out led to almost a 1% increase in state appropriations for higher education spending. That meant more money for college and lower tuition for all of you. Right? That's the type of thing that happens when young people turn out, right? So there is a direct connection between young people increasing their voting power and thus getting the policies that they want. So voting matters, but voting's not enough, right? Like it's necessary, but insufficient. So here are four other things you got to do, I think anyway. I know I'm supposed to sort of talk about research and academia and I don't know. This is like what research, right, tells us. Okay, so this is based upon best sort of political science research, best social science research. So the first thing is you got to contact your elected officials, right? I talk to a lot of young people, I teach them, and I always ask in my intro to American government classes, like if you've ever emailed or called your state official or congressional representative and like just a few hands go up, right? You got to contact your elected officials at the national level, at the state level, at the local level, right? Sure, you can email them and you can send them like the mass emails. Like social science research tells us that gives us a really lukewarm response. It doesn't really move the needle. You know what moves the needle? Calling your representatives' offices, right? Now, maybe some of you are like a little apprehensive about that. You're scared. You're not going to get the elected official on the phone. It's going to be their staffers, right? Many of them are college students who are interns, right? So like, don't feel any pressure. Call, express your opinion about a policy issue you care about. right? Maybe share an experience that you're having that you think government can do something about. Call. It really does matter. They pay attention to those. Oftentimes, call logs are kept, and then a summary is given at the end of the day to the elected official. And if enough people call on a particular issue, that's going to get communicated to the representative, right? And don't just call when you're mad, right? Call also when you're happy about something. Send positive signals about the laws that get adopted and passed that you care about, all right? So if the park grass in your neighborhood isn't getting cut, call. If you care about reproductive rights, call. If you care about affordability, right, in college or affordable housing, call, right? If you care about sort of law enforcement's unequal response to different demographic groups, call. Like if these are the things you care about, call. All right. Second thing, so that was the first thing. Second thing is do a public service internship, right? This is a great way to actually affect change. So voting is important, calling, expressing your opinion is important, but actually being in an office, whether in Washington, D.C., here in Lansing, at a state house member's office or a state senator's office, at the governor's office, maybe with Jocelyn Benson, right? Maybe a judge, a nonprofit advocacy group, right? These are great opportunities for you to make your voice heard, right? And to actually affect policy change. And I know it's sort of tempting to focus on the big, sexy stuff, right? The salient stuff that gets the headlines, but don't forget that you actually can change policy on the boring stuff. The boring, small stuff can be really, really important. Small changes in the law can matter. And sometimes small changes, those are the easiest ones to get, right? So like, don't sort of only set your sights on the big stuff, right? My wife's an attorney. She always says the boring but important work, right? So like, do the boring but important stuff. The things that other people are like, oh, that isn't that interesting to me, but it still affects people's lives. Yeah, tackle that, right? Sign up for that and try to fix it and do something about it. I have the privilege of being able to lead the Michigan Government Semester Program. We run it every single spring. It happens at the Capitol. And students are partnered with the governor's office, state house members, state senators, judges, lobbying firms, you name it. And on top of their internships, they also enroll in a state government class and then an applied policy writing class. And one of the final assignments I have them do is they work as a group and they work on a policy proposal that we go back to the Capitol, we do a mock legislative committee hearing, we invite state senators and state house members, and then these students deliver 10 minutes worth of oral testimony, right? Pitching their policy idea to these legislators. And last year we did this, and several of the groups, the legislators came up afterwards and said, I want to start working on this piece of policy next week, right? Like this is a priority. And those things are being turned into law as we speak, right? So you might think as a student, I can't do anything. No, you can, right? Call, vote, do an internship. 2 more things, all right? Keep learning, right? And then learn some more. So keep taking classes, keep reading current events, keep reading the newspaper, pay attention to the boring and mundane stuff because it matters, right? But make sure you're getting reputable sources. I loved the last exercise we just did, right? Like make sure it's reputable. Don't just trust it because someone who's like-minded like you sent it along, maybe a friend. Make sure you do your homework. Don't continue to perpetuate misinformation out there, right? So keep doing your homework, make sure that it's reputable sources, keep staying on top of these issues. So read the newspaper, right? Don't get your information just from social media outlets like Instagram and TikTok, right? Those are client-generated or customer-generated information. That's not fact-checked by any news organization, right? So make sure you keep getting your information from trusted, reputable sources. And then the last thing is, this is a hard one. This is even hard for me. This is why I'm leaving it at last, but it's probably one of the most important ones on here. Keep engaging people different from you and who see the world differently from you. We live in a really hyper-polarized era, right? And it's easy to sort of stay in our camps and be outraged by what the out party says, right? Or what someone else says who's different from us. We're not going to move the needle though, and we're not going to sort of, all the political science research shows us the only way to sort of build some compromise and to find common ground again is to not stay entrenched in our camps, but to actually talk to others, right? So don't talk to others in a shouting match on social media, right? Find a genuine, authentic space where you can try to get to know people who share different views than you do. That is the path forward, right? To sort of moving away from our hyperpolarization and actually trying to find common ground and to not only sort of sustain democracy, but strengthen democracy. And I'll leave it at there.
Hello, everybody. I don't even know how to follow that. That was like the most inspiring ending to it, right? Keep engaging. Right, this today is our student activist, a little bit policy and activism panel. And again, I'm sort of going to give you a quick 411 on my experience with activism beyond just voting. If you know me, you know voting is kind of my thing. It's my main lane. It is my one true passion. It has my heart. But on top of that, I've been able to find a lot of other ways to engage and look at voting as obviously something amazing in itself to uplift our democracy, but also as something that is a way to achieve other change that I feel like is necessary and other ways to improve our democracy or the well-being of our citizens. So I'm going to try to give you a quick rundown on the last couple of years of my life. I've never been someone that really identifies with the term activist. It feels really heavy and you only have to be the best of the best, make no mistakes. But I'm really grateful to sort of come into that and find the power in being an advocate and an activist as a student. So for me, it really started when I was in high school. I was a student journalist. That was my thing. And I didn't like sitting on the sidelines. I have a very close friend that was a Parkland survivor. A lot of my experience is in gun violence prevention work, nonpartisan gun violence prevention through Students Demand Action in every town. And I watched student rallies happen. I watched my friends suffering on the news. And I really wanted to get involved. I didn't just want to write about it. I didn't just want to interview people. I wanted to keep this from happening. I wanted to never report on it again. So with that, once I got to college, that was in mainly my senior year. Once I got to college, I'm one of the founding members of a Students Demand Action chapter at my university, Central Michigan University. And through that, I really found a lot of ways to engage my community as well as amplify the voices of others already doing this work in the Great Lakes Bay region. Gun violence prevention and gun violence touches all of us. So it was something that was really powerful to connect with others who were able to share their stories with me. And their vulnerability was really empowering to me and wanted me to continue doing that work. And obviously voting is a lane of that. And so I sort of realized that gun violence prevention was something that the majority of Americans agree on, especially common sense gun legislation, things like red flag laws, closing loopholes in the system, safe and secure storage. Those are supported even by gun owners. Those that are NRA members are in support of it, but the dialogue around it and the way we vote does not represent the way we actually feel. And that was really troubling to me. And so that's one way, right, that voting connects to gun violence prevention. And I've been grateful to make that connection and find the power in both regular advocacy and sharing our stories. I've been grateful to go to Lansing a couple times, meet with my representatives, sit in their offices with fellow survivors of gun violence and share our stories with them, look them in the eyes and say, this is what's happening in your communities back at home and across this entire country. So advocacy in the traditional sense, like calling your reps, meeting with them in person if you have the opportunity, as well as, again, voting and organizing voter registration drives and encouraging students, if they do vote, to consider nonpartisan, common sense gun violence prevention efforts. Mouthful, right? And then with that, with gun violence prevention, since starting being one of the founding members of our university chapter, I now serve on the National Advisory Board for Students Demand Action through the nonprofit Everytown. And that has been such an inspiring opportunity to meet pretty regularly with about 20, 25 students from all across the country, high school and college level. It breaks my heart that there are 15, 16-year-olds in these meetings with me every month, but we meet regularly to advocate both for our causes, but also how to get more chapters started, how to find student power through organizing in every single state in the country. And then this summer, I was grateful again to grateful and again, heartbroken. It's really hard to say as we're doing this work. It's empowering and you find community, and some of my best friends are involved in this work, but I should have never had to meet these people in the first place. But again, that could be its entirely own panel. So after the recent Texas shooting in Uvalde, we organized in Washington, D.C. with a series of rallies. I got a call that said, can you be on a flight? We have a couple things we're trying to do. So I was in Washington, D.C. this summer for a couple days at various rallies, nonpartisan, as well as things like I never thought I'd do. Wearing a bulletproof vest on the steps of the Capitol is something that no one should have to do, but a group of students all wearing them, crying out for help is something that we found lots of ways to be activists, I guess is what I'm saying. Nonpartisan, anti-gun violence advocates that speak for the majority of Americans. So I found a lot of power in that, a lot of community in that, and a lot of sorrow in that. And then totally switching gears, my other main lane of activism has been in the past. Another thing I'm grateful to work with CVP about is redistricting. Total tone shift, I know, from pretty much the most heartbreaking stuff to maps. But I love redistricting. I love maps. I was so grateful to speak repeatedly to the commission and advocate for communities of interest, and college students specifically as communities of interest, because college students, I would attend a variety of meetings where I was the youngest person in the room by a couple decades. And these are maps that affect us for an entire decade. And that, again, connects to voting. That is the foundation of our democracy. And I felt like I couldn't, in good faith, advocate for students to vote and to register to vote if our entire system itself was flawed. I'm born and raised in Midland, Michigan, so I came from a non-competitive district, and I knew that it was often a rigged system or an unfortunate system, no matter who it's rigged for. So I felt like both gun violence prevention, redistricting efforts are all tied back to me. The central pillar is voting, is civic engagement education with young people, especially.
Let's hear it for Katie. Awesome. Hey, everyone. My name's Safara Menon. I'm currently the Deputy State Coordinator for Campus Vote Project. You may have seen me running around this event, but I'm actually here to talk to you guys about some of the work that I did before I came to Campus Vote Project when I was a student with the Student PIRGs. The Student PIRGs is the Student Public Interest Research Groups. And when I was a student in college, I was a member, a campaign coordinator, and several other roles within the organization, working on a variety of different advocacy campaigns. I first came into the world of campaign advocacy, like many of you, working on elections, when I started working on the 2018 midterm election ages ago. But it feels like just yesterday when I was registering students to vote on my campus, helping them turn out on their polling place. And I remember very distinctly, very vividly, a lot of students that I met with not being able to actually turn out to vote on their campus because they didn't register or they didn't realize that they were in the wrong area, and they ran into a lot of barriers. And after the election, we ended up working with our local county officials to advocate for changes in our county to have campus polling places and to have same-day registration on campus. And that journey led us to actually advocating on the state level for a change in legislation in California. And we successfully passed a law that California colleges had to have same-day voter registration, which was a really awesome experience for me to be able to see. Great. Thank you. It was a really great experience to see that the work that we were doing and was actually successful, that we were able to really make a change on one of these issues. And so I continued in that lane, continued working on legislative advocacy on a variety of different campaigns at different levels, whether it was campus policies, meeting with my campus president, trying to get them to change the smallest things, to even working on federal legislation. I don't know if I can even count the amount of different campaigns that I've worked on, but I'll give you guys a quick snapshot of them, and then I'm happy to answer questions about specific ones. But some of my favorite campaigns that I worked on were most recently advocating for a conservation policy on the federal level, the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, which protects some of our endangered species here in Michigan and across the country, working to protect our environment and fight climate change. I also worked to pass a bill back when I was in school in California that committed the state to 100% renewable energy, which was super exciting. As well as my passion project is actually plastic pollution. Plastics are a really weird niche thing that I have a lot of feelings about. And I think a lot of people have a lot of feelings about, especially because of the way that they, in particular, impact communities like mine. Communities of color are predominantly impacted by a lot of the adverse effects of pollution and plastic in particular. And I was lucky enough to get to organize a team across the state that got the University of California to phase out single-use plastics on their campuses. And overall, all of these experiences were super exciting to actually see these policies passed, but primarily it was really exciting to be able to get to work with a team of other young people and bring our voices together and to actually create power for our generation by being able to make those voices heard on a higher level. I think we've heard a lot about things that you can do as an individual to make a difference, but I think one of the biggest things that we can do is actually to stop being just an individual and to come together as a group by organizing our peers, our communities, creating organizations or joining organizations, but basically forming a collective, because as a collective, I think is one of the best ways that we can really make a difference. Our generation is affected by a lot of issues that other generations aren't, like climate change. And so it's really important, I think, to see the ways that we have all of these things in common and to come together to make a push for change. I think some of the things that made the efforts that I was part of most successful was, I guess, on the one hand, that we met with elected officials, we called them, we made our voices heard, we actually asked them for the things that we wanted. But more than that was that we really built that community support and we built community itself to actually create a mass of people, a base of people that were calling for these issues and really coming together in support, because that kind of community and that kind of power is undeniable. And that's what allows us to actually really make change in the long term. And a lot of the work that you all are doing, engaging voters, getting people involved in politics, and just having conversations with your peers is the base of that. So continuing that and taking that a step farther is really what it takes to organize our community to create a future that reflects what each of you as individual young people wants to see in the world. That's what I've got. And now we have some time to take questions from all of you guys. So folks who have questions, if you could please raise your hand and Jeremy will bring you a microphone.
What would you guys say is the best way to, if you have like a specific topic that you are passionate about, what's the best way to start something or get involved with something and try to make an actual difference? Because like obviously if we have our vote, but then I also like have other things that I want to provide. Like what if I want to get more involved than just my vote?
Yeah, I will say that, like, depending on what the issue is, odds are there are other people who also care about that and are working on it. I come from the world of like nonprofit advocacy. So my advice is to find organizations that are part of that and volunteer with them and join them. There are so many great organizations out here that are already doing the work. So joining those efforts and supporting them. I will also say, like, depending on what your issue is, looking at the communities that are primarily affected by these issues is a great thing to do. You can look and see, like, what is the community that is actually affected by this and what are they saying? What do they want us to do? And seeing how you can support that. But yeah, I mean, just like looking for other organizations and joining their efforts. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. So joining other people who are out there. And I think that if you're on campus, a great way to start that is to look at like, what are the clubs that are active on your campus? What are the chapters of nonprofits that are active on your campus? And joining other students that are getting into this work.
Yeah, I just really want to second that advice, right? I think I hear from a lot of people who are like, I'm really passionate about this issue. I'm going to start a club. I'm like, there's like 4 clubs working on this very issue, right? Like, don't reinvent the wheel. Join forces with others. I love the leadership, right? In the enthusiasm to tackle these things, but it's a lot more effective when you work together. The other thing I would say is do your research. Get to know the issue inside and out, right? Like, it's really hard to rebut someone's arguments when you know the thing so well, right? And so all the people who are naysayers and say, no, I'm not going to care about that issue, you're like, well, this is why you should, right? And connecting with the community, connecting with the stakeholders, connecting with the people involved and most impacted by this issue is going to be the way forward, right? Like, bringing those voices to the table, that's the key.
Other questions? Don't be shy.
I love how you said ask them how they need help. Because a lot of times people think they know what somebody needs, not what they really need.
I'm coming over. Don't worry. I'm on my way.
So you talked about how important it is to keep having conversations with people who think differently than you. But obviously in this very polarized world that we live in, that can be really difficult sometimes for a lot of people. Do you have any tips or like ideas on like how do you go about those conversations? And then like, when is the best time to have those conversations? And when might it be better to just let it not happen? Or is there a time for it not to happen?
Damn it. You asked me the really hard question. Yeah, you're right. It is hard. It's hard to have these conversations when others see the world so differently. But I'm still a firm believer in the public opinion surveys and polling show this, that we actually agree on a lot more than we disagree on. And so I think it's starting with that premise, right? Instead of like starting from our entrenchment and sort of resorting to rhetoric, asking open-ended questions of someone who disagrees with you, like, whoa, well, can you say more? Can you explain to me why you think that? Or what's your experience been with that? Generally, it's hard for people to fall back to their camps or rhetoric when you ask them those open-ended questions, right? Make sure that you actually have the space, right, and energy and time to do this. So like, if you know that you're about to leave a family function and your Uncle Gene's there, and you know that it's been contentious in the past and you only have 5 minutes, maybe don't bring up the contentious political issue right before you leave, right? But if you get there, well, maybe it's a perfect time, I don't know. But if you get there and you have some like one-on-one time, right? And you think that there's space for that, both as well as like emotional space for you to tackle that, then maybe like open that. Yeah, it's a delicate process, right? I've had the most success when, and I haven't always been perfect at this, but when I have said things like, tell me more. Why do you think that? Or do you think that you would ever compromise on that? Asking people their willingness to sort of meet in the middle forces them to actually think about how entrenched they are, right? How firm their position is. Most oftentimes people say, oh yeah, I think I would be willing to move on that. Or I could sort of see the other, I don't agree with, or I wouldn't vote that way, but I could see the other viewpoint, right? A lot of our politics right now are so contentious and so polarized because we just hate the other side, right? We're just outraged by the other side. And I get some of that, right? I also get outraged and I do this for a living, right? But that's not good for our democracy in the long run. And it's not good for our politics and policy making.
I would say, like, just from my own experience with, right, probably one of the most controversial issues today of gun violence prevention is I'm very intentional with the language I use. One of the first things we do when we're organizing every school year is like, we'll do an entire meeting where we'll talk about these are the very specific words we use and why, because if we're entering conversations, we're saying things like gun control. A lot of times that automatically puts people on the defense. So I say gun violence prevention. I'm anti-gun violence. I'm not anti-gun. If you want to have a gun, go off. Happy for you, bestie. That's just not something that, you know, maybe I want in my personal life, or that's just something that if you want to own a gun, I'm super happy you have that right. And I just want you to know that there may be risks associated with that. Or like for me, I'm very passionate within gun violence prevention about domestic violence prevention and gun violence against women and how gun violence is a women's issue. So I'll talk about, you know, maybe you think owning a gun as a woman will be a really great tool for protection. Statistics show us that that's not the case. And so that doesn't mean you shouldn't have one, but I just want you to be mindful of that. And so I want to echo all the things you said, as well as I tried to be so intentional with my word choice, because I think sometimes there's certain words that have connotations that will sort of set people off for very good reasons.
I don't have anything to add. Those are great.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Jeremy's over here.
He's getting his steps in today.
So my question is actually for all three, of you. Because yes, there are like, especially like when you have like friends or family that are like on the opposite side of the political spectrum as you, and it can especially be clear on campuses. When you guys have these type of discussions with each other, what would you actually do to keep things, to keep things at a low, to keep things civil without it escalating into a screaming match?
Oh, okay. I think, I mean, I have a lot of my extended family members. Family Christmas can get a little heated sometimes, so I feel that. I have family members that have literally worked in the state house for things that I don't support. And there's a sort of understanding that, at least for us, and I'm grateful for it. So I can't speak to any personal experiences with really like screaming matches around the dinner table. But which I'm grateful for. But an understanding that I know that they are doing what they are doing because they feel in their heart that that is the right thing to do. I know that they think that that is what is needed for this country, just like I think my views on certain things are needed for this country. And so sort of as we talked about in the last question, is giving them grace and understanding that even if I don't understand why they feel the way they do on certain issues, I can at least give them the grace and the understanding that they believe in it wholeheartedly for a very good reason. And because they're someone that I love and trust and am a family member or a friend, that like they are doing it in good faith for some reason. And so that's where sort of you break into the dialogue, if you're comfortable having that, of giving them that grace, having those open-ended questions, and not using any language that is accusatory or has negative connotations.
Yeah, I have a kind of practical thing too. It's okay to take a break. If you're in a situation where you feel like you're getting really heated or you can't be there anymore, take yourself out of the situation. I've definitely been in a place where I was like, I can't really talk to you about this anymore. I'd love to have this conversation again later, but right now I need to tap out and, go give yourself the time and the space that you need to feel your feelings and then come back, re-engage the person. But you don't always have to be, on and fighting the fight all the time. It is totally okay to take a break and take the time that you need for yourself. I mean, it's good to go back, circle back with those people and, continue engaging with them, but it is always okay to take a break and take care of yourself.
Yes to all of that. The only thing I would add is temper expectations, right? Be realistic about the expectations. You're unlikely to change someone's vote. That's not the goal of engaging others different from you or who see the world differently, right? The goal is to plant seeds that will someday hopefully sort of emerge and maybe change their viewpoint. Maybe this is too personal, but I had a heated conversation with my brother years ago about torture and the use of torture in the military. And he thought that that was an important tactic. And I was absolutely against it as someone who advocated for human rights at Capitol Hill in DC. And so we had a very heated conversation. And, several years later, he called me up on the phone and he was like, I just read a book. You were right, Marty. Right. And it was almost a decade later, and that's okay. Right. It's planting seeds and frankly, what I'm not saying is that he's been right on certain things too. Right. He's convinced me and moved my fixed position on certain things as well. But it's only been through those conversations that we've had that have helped us both understand each other's perspectives, even if not changing votes, right? So temper expectations. Don't think that in a 15-minute conversation, all of a sudden this person's going to go from this party to this party, right? That's not the goal of these. And remaining calm, right? Being really careful about your word choice, all of that matters.
Words have power.
Right, yeah. Yeah, words, not power. And if you feel yourself inside getting heated and you're like, uh-oh, I'm going to blow. Yeah, take a break, take a step back. Be like, wow, this was really helpful. Thanks for sharing your insights. I think we better leave it there. I know we're not going to convince each other, but it was really nice talking with you about this. Right. And just leaving it at that. That's okay. That's a start. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
We could probably take one quick question if there is one.
So, okay, going beyond joining orgs for becoming engaged and informed, what would you suggest that non-poli-sci majors do? I guess resources that we can take advantage of so that we can A, know what's going on, and B, have the opportunity to join those, because I just feel like there's so much that I can't keep track of.
Yeah, that is a great question. I will say, as a non-poli-sci major, I'm happy to answer this question. I was a STEM kid, and I know that it can be really difficult sometimes to get involved, especially when most of the people in these spaces are people who study this and know a lot about what's going on. I think one of the most important things for me was to think about how the things that I was studying in my non-political science classes and the things that I was working towards are really related to politics and connected in a lot of these ways. And just following other sources of information that were going to tell you about it. So, I mean, for me, I don't like to read the physical newspaper, but I follow a lot of news sources I get their email updates and I read the news about stuff like that. I set alerts for myself about different issues and things that I care about. So I was a biology major in school. And one of the things that I learned a lot about and care a lot about is climate change. And so thinking about the way that the issues that I saw were connected to politics, because everything that we learn about and talk about is connected to politics, because all of the things that our legislators and our elected officials and government officials do affect our lives, and they all touch politics in some way. And then just staying informed about things, even if you don't know enough or have enough time to really go out and take action, just keeping informed about these issues. I'll say it again, reading the news and finding trusted sources about each of these issues and staying in touch with what they're saying and talking to other people about what they're doing. So, yeah, I think it's there's also a lot of different ways that you can make a difference in politics. It doesn't always have to be running an organization and going to a ton of events and volunteering. Sometimes there's small things like just keeping in touch with what's going on in your legislature, by signing up for updates from different organizations and then just making calls in whenever you get a chance. You can make a 30-second phone call, read an email from an organization that you like about an issue, make a 30-second phone call into your legislator about an event. And that's a super quick thing you can do that doesn't require you to be super in the know about everything that's going on. All right. Cool. I think we are just about out of time. So we are going to close out over here.